In today's training, we're going to be talking about, speaking of Stephen Covey, we're going to be talking about proactive federal sales success. I want you to be able to have that success. You should be able to have that success. And I'm going to talk to you about my process for federal success and some of the things you can follow along to be able to achieve that success. In the federal government, one of my favorite things about it is that the federal market is very predictable. The Federal Acquisition Lifecycle, how the government buys, is very predictable. They call this the procurement lifecycle or the acquisition approach or lifecycle. And as I go forward, I know how the government's going to buy. They start off basically with an idea, and they start bouncing that idea around internally around the program office. Do we want this? Do we not want this? What do we need on specifics around it? What do we think it might cost? What do we think the budget might need to be? And do we even have the budget? They're having some of these internal soft conversations. It moves into more of a formal market research phase, where then they're maybe trying to engage industry on both the discussion around the technical side and the acquisition approach. And then it goes on into the RFP. And I love that, right? It's very predictable. That's the federal acquisition lifecycle. We have a sales lifecycle that follows the buyer's process, basically neck and neck the whole way. We're going along the same journey. We have different process steps and activities that we do as a sales person rather than an acquisition person, but we all are still kind of driving along that same parallel path. And that too is predictable. Our sales life cycle is pretty predictable. We begin with an idea, whether it's an idea because there's a recompeted contract and we're going to go after it, or because we have an idea we're trying to get the government to explore, or because we saw an industry day event or a long-range acquisition forecast where they're talking about it. Whatever it is, we kind of get started when we hear about that idea for an opportunity, and we follow a similar path as the buyer. That's normal, right? That's their process. That's our process. And process is what will give us the proactive approach that I'm talking about in today's training towards success. We don't want our success to be reactive. That's unpredictable. It can happen that we sometimes have successes and wins. I've had wins like that, and maybe you have as well, where somebody's come along and brought a large contract, 5-10 million or something, and you didn't even plan on that. That's great, but that's not how you build a company. That's how you get lucky, and you take that for sure. But predictability comes from having a proven process that you and your colleagues can follow in your company. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I'm going to break up today's topic into 3 sections. The first thing I want to talk about is just some tips about identifying opportunities you can win. I've done hundreds of trainings about how to find opportunities in the federal government. And so you can go back and look at those collectively to reinforce your skills around identifying opportunities. But today I'm going to speak on it from a little bit different angle. And then I want to talk about shaping opportunities to gain competitive advantage. This is fundamental to being proactive for your success. You don't just put an opportunity into the pipeline, wait for the RFP to drop and respond, right? You do something proactively about that opportunity. We'll talk about that in section 2 here. And then the last thing I want to wrap up with is the proposal. The proposal has 4 C's that when you use the 4 C's, you can begin to drive towards a winning proposal. A winning proposal means that when you submit it, the government wishes they could give it to you. There might be 3 or 4 other winning proposals, so they have to choose the best one. But at least you're at the top of the list saying, we want to work with this company. Whether we choose them is secondary. The first thing is getting on the short list of, yes, this is a perfect company to serve our needs. And I'm going to talk about the 4 C's of a winning proposal. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonough. I am the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, co-founder of GovCon in a Box, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training, where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a government contractor after I got out of the Army, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When we follow a process A to Z, we have repeatable, predictable results. This is exactly what today's training is about. Talking about process and how we can use that process to give you predictable revenue in 2026, right? Some revenue in 2025. We still got 6 months here, but really you're looking out at sales you make today are going to lead to the next year. If you haven't done so already, I see some people over on YouTube, etc. Come on over here and connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow my newsletter here on LinkedIn called Government Contracting Success. I'd love to have you track on that. And the last thing on this page, is I just want to remind you of tomorrow's training. That one is 4 tips to win in Q4 2024 or 2025. The end of the fiscal year's here. And so I want to give you 4 tips that could help you have a little bit more success. Okay, let's get started on identifying opportunities. I'm going to go ahead and show a different screen in a second and really dive into it. But from a high level, the very first thing you need to make sure, and I say this anytime I'm talking about something, I try to go back to the very basic thing. You must know what you sell. You must have a single core competency. That thing could have a couple of elements, right? But you need to have a single core competency saying, this is what I sell. An example is I have a company that does acquisition support services. They also dabble in the AI and the IT space and some of this other stuff. And what I encourage them to do, and they are looking at it now, is they're an acquisition support services company that has IT and AI enablers. That means I use IT or AI to make our acquisition support services so much stronger, right? So I'm not off building random AI solutions. I'm building AI solutions related to acquisition support. And this is what I mean by niching down and having that core competency. You can still have these enablers, these things that support your core competency. But when you have a core competency, it really helps you, in this particular case, identify opportunities, because that's all I look for is acquisition support service contracts, as an example. All right, so the next 2 things relate to when you're getting an opportunity. This kind of goes into capture, et cetera, of what you'll be doing. Not to go too far down that path, but you need to perform a requirements gap analysis against your core competency. And I'll show you how I do that, or how I've done that for decades, right? But you perform a requirement gap analysis. And what you're trying to say by a score of 1 to 5 is, are we really going to be able to support this contract's requirements? Or are we just thinking we are because the title looks good and we're like, yeah, we're good with that? No. Go deep down into the requirement gap analysis. I'll show that in a second. The second thing is perform an acquisition gap analysis. In this one, I think maybe it'll sound a little bit more familiar, but are we on this contract vehicle? Do we have a top secret if that's what's needed? Those kind of things, they're not related to the requirement. They're related to the acquisition approach. And so you need to perform an acquisition gap analysis. Either one of these will tell you whether you should prime or sub or abandon, right? So if you feel like you're pretty good, 40% or something, then you might want to, you want to subcontract or abandon the opportunity. But if you're 70% or above, then maybe you want to prime contract that. When you do a gap analysis, then you're able to really identify those opportunities that you can win, because you don't want to put a lot of effort into capture or opportunity pursuit if your chances of winning are minimal. There are good opportunities out there for you. You just got to find them. Okay, let me show you really quickly a requirement gap analysis. Let me just pull my spreadsheet up. So this is a spreadsheet version of it. And I've been doing this for years. Let me zoom in a little bit. But I've been doing this for years, where I take a requirement and I shred it completely. Look at, if you will, at like a 10 meetings, task 12 here, and then it starts going down. What I teach is break down that task. You might think to yourself, oh, the requirement just said attend meetings. Let me go over here for a second. The requirement says attend meetings. Yeah, we're good. That's the end of it. No. Break down that task to the smallest components so you can start seeing, have you held meetings, in this case, like US Transcom? That's the specific thing they asked. That's different than if you scored yourself, yeah, we're a 5 for 5 on attending meetings. But if you look and you see deeper, then you start going, oh, I need to do that. Have I held technical meetings, or have I held project meetings or leadership meetings, right? Those are different things. That's what I mean when I say a requirement gap analysis. So you can see column G, the colored column, that's where I'm doing a scoring of 1 to 5. And over on the column H, you see numbers. And what those do, those relate to the company's past performances. And what you're trying to do is to make sure you have enough past performances relate to a requirement. And then it helps you identify, do we have 3 really strong past performances? So if I scroll down on this one, just to give you an idea of what an actual requirement gap analysis looks like, just a ton of information, right? You see it's broken down. We really break it out. This particular one, by the way, we did it and then we sent it over to large primes. So we're talking about Booz Allen, GDIT, they filled this out as well. And it's a way for the entire team to know perfectly at the beginning of an opportunity, do we really cover down on it? So you see it, I'm well north of 300 rows there. And the idea here is when you do a gap analysis like that, you're able to truly find and confirm that you are a slam dunk for that opportunity, or that opportunity is a slam dunk for you. That particular thing, it seems like a lot. There's 300 rows and it's crazy. But that's the difference between winners and people who don't win as much, is the winners are willing to put the effort in the beginning to make sure that they're going after the right opportunities, that they can win, that they're finding the right teammates. When you get a teammate to fill out that requirement gap analysis, you're not teaming with a friend or somebody you like and you've teamed with in the past. You're teaming with a company that has just demonstrated that they have the past performances and the skill sets to be able to do the task areas that you need them to do. Sometimes when you go after opportunities, especially when you go after larger opportunities, they want to see a performance work statement from your past performance that says you did this work that relates to a task area. This is why you want to work with teammates early on to make sure you're getting the right teammates. It's not enough for them to say they've done it, but hey, sorry, we just need to verify that it's there. And we need to verify that we have done this. Okay, so going through there, right, you know your core competency, then you're going to perform these different gap analysis. When you do, you're identifying the opportunities you can win. So the next thing you do after you have these opportunities, and by the way, you do this as early as possible in the life cycle. You want to get in there in opportunities. When I have an opportunity come in, it's one of the first things I do before I talk to anybody else in the company. That's part of my qualifying process. For those companies that use qualify, pursue, bid type thing, I'm like, you can't move to pursue unless you've done a requirement gap analysis. Personally, I like to move from unqualified to qualified, having a requirement gap analysis in the middle. I actually automated that over on GovCon in a Box. I'm not here to necessarily talk about that, but I automated it because we were spending 8 or 16 hours to do those gap analysis. Now it's in minutes, but you can still do this. This is the way that we really can shred a document and understand it. Okay, so this slide, we're talking about shaping the opportunity so that you can really have that competitive advantage. That's the purpose, one of the main purposes of capture. It's not just to sit there and prepare some basic stuff we're going to write. We want to understand, how are we raising ourselves above our competitors in our customers' eyes, our potential customers' eyes. This is why we want to do things like have meetings with the customers so they start to know us. They start to understand how we're thinking, so it aligns with what they read later when we submit a proposal. So there's all this kind of activity you can do to increase your competitive advantage. And that's what I want to help you do. When you're brand new, it's a little harder to do. You have to gain experience to begin to get good at this, but you can have competitive advantage because frankly, a lot of people are too lazy in between the time they find an opportunity and they write a response. Sometimes it's too hard to do the work in the middle. And if you're willing to do that, that's where you rise above the competitors in your customers' eyes. Okay, so the first thing I want to tell you is that yes, you can influence federal buyers. They definitely want to engage with industry and they want to hear suggestions. This is part of their process. I told you that the federal acquisition process is a very mature process. They want to engage industry. They want to know, are we thinking about the requirements in the right way? Are we thinking about the solution in the right way? Are we thinking about our technical approach or acquisition approach in the right way? And so they definitely want to engage with you. I had a contract officer who came into one of my trainings a while ago, and she was like, no, you can't, you can't control us or whatever it was. Like, you can't influence us. She wasn't being argumentative. She was just like, you're crazy, Neil, in a nice way. And what I said was, no, we can influence you. For example, we can sit there and come in and say, look, if you come on this contract vehicle, you have more competitors or vendors who will respond to your opportunity. And you increase the likelihood of getting a sufficient amount of response to have a good vendor chosen. Another example is we can influence whether you set aside a women-owned small business by 20 women-owned small businesses or 30 or 40 or 50. I don't know what the number is, but when a contracting officer puts out market research looking for, whether women-owned small businesses could do it or whatever small business type can do it, and 50 women-owned small businesses who are all qualified, all respond and say, hey, can you please set this aside to women-owned small business? Now we're influencing you. We don't control the contracting officer in any way or the federal buyer in any way. We influence them through data and evidence. We're asking to do this thing. Here's some data supporting it and some evidence. This NAICS code is a better NAICS code, and here's why. And sometimes we make our case and it rings true, and we influence them in the direction we want. Sometimes we influence them and they're like, nah, thanks anyways, right? But you can influence the buyers because this is what they want, is to have the discussion with industry. The second thing here on shaping an opportunity is understanding there's two main parts of what you're shaping. The first one is you can shape the acquisition approach, like I was just talking about, maybe a NAICS code, a contract vehicle, the set aside. But I wanted to give you a different example that maybe you haven't heard of before. And this is something I have personally done on my own contracts. And I have helped customers in since then shape contracts in other ways, like around an 8A clause or something. But let me just use the one I put in that is perhaps less known. There's a clause in the FAR, and I don't claim to be a FAR have it FAR memorized. But basically, there's this clause that says, if we commit to the government, we will have something done by December 2025, and we don't get it done by December 2025, and they agreed to pay me, let's say $1 million, they can start docking me money or not paying me money. So the agreed amount was $1 million by December. There could be a clause in there that says by January, if it's still not done, now it's 900,000, now it's 800,000, whatever the number is, right? That's immaterial at the moment, but I called it a disincentive, right? And that's probably totally not the right word. I learned this though, and then I began to teach it after I learned it. I learned it from the government because the government tried to put something just like that into our contract. And me being the sales guy I am, I said, well, if you're going to put this penalty, which is what it is, right? A disincentive is the wrong kind of term, but a penalty clause, right? If you're putting this penalty on me, then I want an incentive to exceed it because I know we're really good at this. You need it by December. But what if you get it by November and you don't have to worry? I mean, the reason December was important was not some random date. It meant they would have to keep an old system. They would have to keep paying a lot of money to another vendor for something else that they wanted to get rid of. And I was like, well, what happens if we get it done in November? What about October? And so we went through this conversation, and they taught me about the FAR. They're like, no, absolutely. They turned to their program office and they said, would this be valuable to you if this vendor got the job done even earlier? And so we were able to negotiate that and put it in. I was able to influence. Now, in this case, I was able to influence them by talking to them, right? But I was able to influence the direction they went, and they put that in, and we ended up getting a bonus from that. And that's the kind of influence I'm talking about with the acquisition approach. Begin to look at the acquisition details and ask yourself what needs to be in there. One other quick example is top secret. That's the type of acquisition approach. I had a contract that was full out TS. Everybody had to be TS. And I convinced the Air Force that, no, you didn't need it. We were all developers. All you really need are these three primary key persons, right? Key people. All you needed is them to have the clearance, the TS clearance. They were going to be on site. The rest of us were going to be off site. You didn't need us to have a clearance because we were building software. And in between these three people in your network and our people in our network is the NSA and DHS. They had scanning tools that would, hammer our code and make sure there was nothing in it that was bad. And so what we said to the government was, you could reduce your own costs on TS clearances, as well as having us on site and some of this other things. So we were able to have the conversation and use data and evidence on why they should go in the direction we were talking about. And so we reduced 20 plus TS personnel needed down to 3 personnel, and the rest were all just really, many of them didn't even need clearances at all at that point because the system took care of the protection of the agency. All right, and the last one is shaping the technical approach. So if you think about the acquisition approach, you're doing that mostly through the contracting officer. Sometimes the program office slides into that discussion. And then you got the technical approach, which is pretty much all the program office, right? And in here, it really is the scope of work that you're talking about. You want to influence the technical approach in different directions that are enhancing your strengths and minimizing your weaknesses. So an example of a weakness that I've had in the past in a company was a program office said, hey, we need these, whatever vendor comes in, we need to be Microsoft Gold. And that's because they were working with Microsoft as well, who charged $450 an hour or something, right? And Gold certification was this high level thing. But at the time, you could get to silver by being good at services. The only way you got to gold was by selling Microsoft licenses. And so what we did was go in and convince the customer, you don't need us to be at gold. You need us to be at silver. And in fact, we have certified engineers. Microsoft has certified our engineers as completely competent at doing the work that's there. And so this thing here pushes companies like ours out. And it really just brings in a bunch of vendors who really aren't good at doing the work. They're more good at doing the licenses. Not to knock the gold, right? But what I was doing was definitely knocking my competitors who had gold, and I was pushing my way in by changing that. Another example that I put here is we used to do Microsoft SharePoint services, and you would do migrations from one version of SharePoint to the next, like 2010 version to 2013 or something. And one of the things that I would always try to influence on the requirements is especially if you can see it early on, right, is to get in there and say, hey, you want to make sure that whoever's responding to these task areas, and all the task areas were technical task areas. You need to be like SharePoint administrator, you understand servers, things like that. And what I tried to get them put in is like a seventh or an additional task area, a main task area, saying you need to tell us how you're going to handle user adoption. And we were really, really good at that. We had a 20-page user adoption plan. We had a full-out process. And any of our competitors, they just weren't thinking that at the time. They were just thinking IT and come in and do the work and technical. But we always did our work by going to the very end user and starting there and go, what would annoy them and make them interfere with a successful SharePoint migration? Because the migration success or failure tends not to be on the IT shop. It tends to be on all the users. And the reason it's on the users is because people tend not to engage them early on. And we were very good at that. And so I wanted to bring that to the attention of the program office. You can do this same thing where you go in and you influence the program office to think about the task areas that will enhance their project, and especially that you're good at. This is where you start developing differentiators. They don't have to be really fancy differentiators. I used user adoption plans as a differentiator. That's an example of a differentiator. I don't have to go out and get some big ISO certification or something. It needs to be about the work and the mission that they're trying to accomplish. So this is another thing you can do right there with shaping that technical approach. Okay, so the last thing I just want to point out on when you think about a proactive approach to federal success, right, and your process for success, I talked about how you really need to be identifying the best opportunities for you. And then in capture, you need to think about how you're influencing the buyer, shaping the acquisition and technical approaches. In here, what I want to talk about is as you come out of the end of the capture, you're going to be looking at the proposal. And a good proposal, a winning proposal, remember what I consider a winning proposal is one that you write and the government says, wow, I could award the contract to this company. Doesn't mean you're the only person showing up with a winning proposal, but it does mean all those other competitors are out of the running and now it's down to you three, for example, or something. That's a good day for the contracting officer because they have three vendors they can choose from and know that they're going to be able to support the internal customer's mission, right? And so a winning proposal is all the boxes are checked and you've wowed them completely. I say that the way you write a winning proposal, and I'm not trying to reshape how people are doing proposals. This is just my take on it. It's nothing really overly creative. We all kind of teach the same thing, is that your proposals need to be clear. That means plain language that anybody can understand. Remember, not everybody looking at a proposal is in the program office where the work's going to be done. And so some of those people who are looking at it are less familiar, even if they were in the program office. Imagine if I sent a SharePoint proposal into the CIO shop, the IT shop, but somebody from network engineering is looking at it. They don't know anything about SharePoint. I can't pretend like they're IT, I'm IT, they'll understand it. And so I need to make it clear, right? It's okay to have jargon in there to a degree, but I need the language to be easy to read. The second thing is I need it obviously to be compliant. Compliant just means basically following all the shall statements, right? The vendor shall do this, it shall be 20 pages, things like that. I don't need to go too far into that, so hopefully you understand that because pretty much everybody is compliant. And then the third one is compelling. So we have clear, compliant, now we're compelling. And this is where I say we're wowing the customer. When they're reading it, they're like, wow, I can see this. When I would write a response about SharePoint, I'm talking about the adoption plan, and I'm talking about how I would engage the user. Like, wow, that sounds really good. Actually, I could see how that could help us avoid problems down the line. So that's compelling. I'm wowing them. I need to marry that to convincing. I need to I need to prove that what I just said, my approach to their problems and how I'm going to engage with users to be able to do this successful SharePoint migration, for example, I need to prove that the approach not only will work, but it has worked, that I have done it with other customers. And here's the thing that's really important for the proposal. It's not about making them go to a different section called past performance and discovering it. I need to wow them and then convince them in the same paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, right? If I'm saying something here, I want to weave in a story. I don't need a past performance table. I just need a story. We did this at the Army. We did this at the White House when we were in there and we had this problem. We did it this way. Now I'm just telling a story from past performances, and I can take it from my 4th, 5th, or 20th past performance because my official past performances are over here. Those are separate. If I want to include their stories, I can, or I can grab other past performances and just weave it in to demonstrate that we have that expertise. The last thing I'll say about clear, compliant, compelling, and convincing in the proposal is you want to be thinking about that immediately following the RGA. In fact, if you can, you want to be thinking about it all the way back to the beginning of my training today, where I talked about doing a requirements gap analysis. When I'm doing that, I'm thinking to myself about compliance, compelling, convincing. I'm writing notes off to the side of my compliance activity to see if I'm compliant with the requirements. My gap analysis with the requirements. But I'm also trying to think to myself right now, and then throughout all of Capture, how can I wow them? How can I convince them about wow? I need to talk to people in the company. Have we really done this before? So keep in mind, clear, compliant, compelling, and convincing begins in Capture, not in when the RFP drops or when you start writing a proposal. All right, so here's what I want you to remember from today's training. First thing is you definitely can influence federal buyers. It's an engagement and they want to sit there and hear from industry. Second thing is you have to be proactive, right? So plan to shape the technical and acquisition approach. Don't be reactive to an RFI coming, you're responding, and then you're responding to the RFP type thing, or even doing a little bit of capture. Know that you can proactively influence an opportunity in a way that can be advantageous to your company. And then the last thing is just remember to use the 4 C's, clear, compliant, compelling, and convincing throughout Capture and into proposal writing. Don't forget, tomorrow's training is 4 tips on how to win more in Q4 2025. Hope you can join that. Go ahead and register here on LinkedIn or YouTube. If you're over there, I see some people from YouTube. And then if you're interested in our GovCon Chamber Summer Summit that we're forming, go check out the wait list. You can see the link there is govconchamber.com/GovConRocks. For all of us as we head into our day, just remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I will see you in the next training.